What if your memories were not your own? A woman wakes in a hospital bed. Her name, once familiar, escapes her. Doctors murmur about progress. They smile gently. But nothing feels real, except the endless loop of voices whispering from hidden speakers. You are safe. You are Mary. You chose this. Days blur, weeks pass, faces come and go, then a moment of clarity. Her name isn't Mary. Between 1953 and 1973, a secret program unfolded across North America. The CIA called it MK-Ultra. Officially, it was research into behavioral modification. In truth, it was the most extensive attempt in modern history to rewrite human reality. Psychedelics. Electroshock. Sensory deprivation. All tools for breaking the mind and rebuilding it. At Montreal's Allen Memorial Institute, Dr. Ewan Cameron pioneered something he called psychic driving. Patients were kept in chemically induced comas for up to 3 months. Repetitive recordings played day and night, aiming to erase their personalities and replace them with scripted identities. In some cases, it worked. Subjects forgot their families, believed in lives they never lived, swore to memories of crimes they never committed. A woman once convinced she'd murdered her children later discovered they were alive and visiting her during her treatment. This was not simply about control. It was about constructing entire realities inside the human mind. MK-Ultra's ultimate success lay in creating what it called Manchurian candidates, people who could be programmed to perform acts, even assassinations, and then return to ordinary life with no memory of what they'd done or why. It sounds like fiction, but the documents are real. Declassified. Chilling. They speak of broken people, prisoners, patients, the vulnerable, used without consent, their minds fragmented and reassembled like experimental puzzles. And perhaps most unnerving, the science worked. Researchers found that memory could be implanted not just with drugs, but through psychological techniques alone, hypnosis, sleep deprivation, carefully scripted environments. Memory, it turned out, wasn't as secure as we believed. It was malleable, corruptible, rewritable. Even after MK-Ultra was shut down, its methods didn't vanish. They were refined, migrated into new programs. Operations Phoenix, Artichoke, Bluebird. Today, they live on through interrogation protocols and digital influence campaigns. So what does it mean when memory itself cannot be trusted? This isn't a tale of rogue science fiction. It's a mirror held up to the fragile nature of what we call reality. We trust our memories to define us. But if those memories can be erased, edited, replaced, what remains? Perhaps the more important question is this: how much of your reality is truly yours? This is the beginning of a journey, not into conspiracies, but into the history of human perception and its manipulation. Through each chapter, we'll explore the silent architectures behind what we see, remember, and believe. Not to provoke fear, but to understand. Because understanding, more than anything, is the first step toward freedom from illusion. In the next chapter, the television broadcast you trusted may not have been yours to trust at all. What if the evening news was never meant to inform, but to shape belief? It began with a microphone, a camera, and a quiet handshake. Behind the polished veneer of trusted broadcasters, the CIA's Operation Mockingbird quietly wove itself into the fabric of American journalism. From the 1950s through the 1970s, the agency didn't just observe the media, it became the media. Over 400 journalists, according to declassified documents, worked secretly for the CIA. These weren't fringe voices. They were bylines in the New York Times, CBS, Time Magazine, Newsweek. Some gathered intelligence. Others wrote precisely what they were told. Entire narratives were shaped in conference rooms, not newsrooms, before ever reaching the public. Television became the crown jewel. What aired wasn't merely reportage, it was programming in the truest sense. Stories that served geopolitical interests were magnified, those that didn't, buried, forgotten. Through Operation Mockingbird, reality itself became editable. The public didn't see the world as it was. They saw what the agency wanted them to see. War, peace, threat, victory, all filtered through scripts written not for truth, but for influence. Books, too, were tools. Over 1,000 were published with secret CIA funding. Some were ghostwritten. Others subtly guided public opinion through carefully placed ideology disguised as storytelling or scholarship. Many bestsellers were not merely literature, they were psychological operations. Hollywood wasn't exempt. Espionage thrillers, patriotic war films, and political dramas bore fingerprints of agency consultation. Entertainment became a means to seed narratives long before the headlines caught up. A public conditioned to perceive the world in a certain way would react predictably when real events mirrored fiction. But perhaps the most enduring discovery came not from scripts, but from psychology. Repetition creates belief. A message, no matter how implausible, becomes real when repeated often enough, especially by trusted sources. The CIA understood this well. Reality didn't need to be true. It needed only to be repeated. Mockingbird wasn't about deception alone. It was about consensus. The creation of a single voice that echoed across every station, every paper, every living room. In that echo chamber, doubt became fringe. Questioning the official story became a form of heresy. Even after the program was officially dismantled in 1976, its legacy continued. Whistleblowers and internal memos suggest that the same techniques adapted to the digital age. Algorithms replacing anchors, influencers replacing reporters. In a world saturated with information, the most effective manipulation is not censorship, it's narrative saturation. Control what is said often enough, and you need not control what is true. So when you think back to a moment in history, an invasion, an election, a protest, ask yourself, where did that understanding come from? A photograph, a soundbite, a single, trembling voice framed by a news anchor's solemn tone? What if the image was staged, the source manufactured, the emotion engineered? This chapter isn't about doubting every headline. It's about learning to ask who benefits from the story being told, and who might have paid to tell it. In the next part, we descend deeper, from media manipulation to the disintegration of social trust itself. When communities are torn from the inside, what remains of reality? What if your community was never broken by enemies, but by invisible hands within? The 1960s crackled with defiance. Across cities and campuses, voices rose demanding justice, peace, equality. But behind the scenes, another force was at work, calm, methodical, and devastating. It didn't confront these movements. It infiltrated them. From 1956 to 1971, the FBI ran COINTELPRO, short for Counterintelligence Program. Its goal wasn't surveillance alone. It was reality disruption, a campaign to dismantle organizations not by attacking them from the outside, but by rewriting their inner truths. Agents posed as allies. They attended meetings, earned trust, and then quietly sowed chaos. Fake letters accused leaders of betrayal. Rumors of affairs, theft, and betrayal spread like wildfire. Deep friendships dissolved in suspicion. Movements once built on solidarity collapsed under the weight of engineered mistrust. One tactic, known as badjacketing, was particularly insidious. Agents forged documents accusing loyal members of being informants. Just the suggestion was enough. Paranoia took root. Leaders turned on each other. Chapters fractured. It worked. The Black Panther Party, among the most targeted, was splintered from within. Communications between chapters were intercepted, rewritten, and sent to fuel imagined conflicts. Shootings occurred between groups who believed they were under attack, never realizing their true enemy sat in a federal office typing fake threats under fluorescent light. But COINTELPRO didn't stop at movements. It targeted individuals. Activists were surveilled, harassed, isolated. Employers were contacted. Families were threatened. Entire lives were methodically destabilized until some broke under the strain. Depression, paranoia, suicide, not collateral damage, but intended outcomes. Even the media played a role. Leaked falsehoods painted peaceful organizations as violent, unhinged. Newspaper headlines mirrored FBI talking points. Reality, once again, was crafted, not reported. The program didn't just destroy organizations, it dismantled truth. Those within movements could no longer trust their friends, their information, even their memories. Was that meeting real? Was that argument genuine? The line between natural conflict and orchestrated sabotage blurred until nothing felt solid. And when the dust settled, the narratives remained. Radicals, militants, criminals. The public, unaware of the manipulations, accepted the story. History was quietly rewritten, not by force, but by fracture. Today, similar tactics echo through digital spaces. Bot accounts masquerade as allies, then incite conflict. Dissent is painted as extremism. Communities fracture not because of genuine disagreement, but because someone whispers just the right lie into the right ear at the right time. COINTELPRO showed that reality isn't always destroyed through violence. Sometimes it crumbles through confusion. So ask, when a movement fails, when a leader is discredited, when a cause implodes from within, what truly happened? Truth isn't always buried. Sometimes it's broken into pieces and left scattered in plain sight. Next, we lift our eyes skyward toward lights in the sky that challenged our understanding of the possible and the program that ensured we'd never take them seriously again. What if the unknown was never denied, but deliberately discredited? It starts with a light in the sky, a glint, a shimmer, a sudden movement no aircraft should make. A pilot reports it. A radar confirms. Civilians watch in stunned silence. Then come the headlines: weather balloon, optical illusion, misidentified aircraft. From 1952 to 1969, the U.S. Air Force operated Project Blue Book, publicly an investigation into UFOs. Privately, it was something else entirely, a program to control how the public perceived the unexplainable. The goal was not discovery, it was dismissal. Every sighting, no matter how credible, was funneled into a process designed to find, and if necessary fabricate, a conventional explanation. Pilots with years of flight experience were told they saw Venus. Trained observers were told they imagined things. Evidence that couldn't be explained? Buried. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the program's scientific consultant, would later admit he was pressured to explain away sightings, even when the data contradicted the official narrative. Publicly, he was the face of reason. Privately, he wrestled with a growing unease. The unexplained was being deliberately erased. Behind the scenes, Project Blue Book maintained two sets of files, one for the public, filled with tidy conclusions, the other classified, containing reports of phenomena that defied known physics and conventional understanding. But Blue Book went further. When denial wasn't enough, it created distraction. Staged incidents involving experimental aircraft, weather balloons, or lights rigged to drones were orchestrated to discredit real sightings. By flooding the public with hoaxes and half-truths, the program diluted belief. Real experiences were drowned in noise. Witnesses, too, were targeted. Some were subjected to psychological pressure, others to carefully planted misinformation that altered their own memories. A sighting once vivid became muddled. Certainty turned into doubt. The program didn't just control reports, it controlled the narrative. Working with media outlets, Blue Book ensured coverage stayed within acceptable bounds. Serious witnesses were ignored. Spectacle was emphasized. UFOs became a punchline. And it worked. Public belief in unexplained phenomena declined, even as the frequency of high-quality sightings remained steady. The goal was never to find the truth. It was to ensure that the public stopped asking the right questions. Project Blue Book closed in 1969, but the machinery it built, of explanation over inquiry, of ridicule over curiosity, remains. Today, the idea of intelligent life elsewhere is often treated with derision, despite decades of data and testimony from trained professionals. What was lost wasn't just trust, it was wonder, a sense that the sky might still hold mysteries, that we, perhaps, are not alone. And so we must ask, when the unknown appears, who decides whether we look closer or look away? In the next chapter, we bring our gaze back down to earth, into the heart of America itself, where another invisible war was waged not overseas, but in the minds of citizens at home. What if the battlefield was your own belief? In the late 1960s, as protests surged across America, another operation quietly unfolded beneath the surface, one not of bullets or bombs, but of whispers, doubts, and illusions. It was called Operation Chaos. Officially, the CIA's charter forbade domestic operations, but reality, as we've seen, is flexible in the right hands. Between 1967 and 1974, the agency surveilled more than 300,000 American citizens. Their goal wasn't simply to watch, it was to shape. Operation Chaos infiltrated peace movements, civil rights groups, student protests. Agents didn't just gather intelligence, they influenced decisions, created conflict, and steered outcomes. They suggested radical tactics that would discredit peaceful movements. They fostered internal divisions, whispered half-truths, and introduced strategic lies. The illusion of internal dysfunction began to take hold. Protesters questioned their leaders. Leaders questioned each other. Strategies shifted. Momentum stalled. The outside world saw disorder. Few realized the chaos was engineered. Psychological profiles were compiled on activists. Their vulnerabilities cataloged. Personal relationships, emotional wounds, fears, all studied, then used. A confidant's encouragement might be an agent's manipulation. A sudden shift in group direction might originate in Langley, not the local meeting hall. The operation spread through media, too. Agents posing as journalists published stories in underground papers, sources the movement trusted. These weren't crude smears. They were surgical, stories that mixed truth with fiction, discouragement with praise. A slow erosion of coherence, unity, and trust. Even academia became a battlefield. Professors subtly guided discourse. Conferences were influenced. Research was funded or buried, depending on how well it aligned with government goals. The brilliance of Operation Chaos wasn't its reach, but its invisibility. Activists believed they were responding to real events, real changes, real conflicts. But in truth, many of those realities had been planted like seeds, nurtured by invisible hands, and harvested when the moment was right. Movements imploded, not through force, through fatigue, through disillusionment, through the slow, grinding sense that something wasn't quite right, though no one could say why. By the time the program ended, its fingerprints were everywhere and nowhere. The documents that later surfaced revealed a disturbing truth. Controlling reality doesn't require brute force. It requires patience, psychology, and proximity. Today, the tactics of chaos echo in new forms. Algorithms instead of agents, botnets instead of informants. But the strategy remains the same. Destabilize the narrative from within. So next time a movement dissolves, a cause collapses, a leader self-destructs, ask not just what happened, ask who made it happen. In the next chapter, we move from whispered sabotage to a different kind of influence, one not shaped by people, but by invisible frequencies flowing through the sky. What if the air around you could shape your thoughts? Deep in the Alaskan wilderness stands a forest of towering metal antennas, 180 of them, arranged like sentinels beneath the sky. To most, the facility known as HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, appears to be a weather study station. But beneath the official language of atmospheric science lies something more enigmatic and potentially more profound. HAARP transmits 3.6 megawatts of radio energy into the ionosphere, the electrically charged layer of Earth's upper atmosphere. Officially, the goal is to study how solar storms affect communication systems, but declassified military documents reveal another layer of intent, the modulation of human consciousness. The science is provocative. Our brains operate on delicate electrical frequencies. Alter those frequencies, and you may alter perception, emotion, even behavior. How? HAARP, according to patent filings and internal memos, is capable of focusing energy beams that resonate with brainwave patterns. The frequencies vary: alpha waves to calm, beta to focus, delta to suppress. Imagine an invisible hand adjusting the emotional weather of an entire population. During military conflicts, electromagnetic transmissions were reportedly used to pacify hostile regions. Documented shifts in local mood, rising depression, compliance, lethargy seem to correlate with the facility's active periods. Independent researchers noted sleep disruptions, sudden anxiety spikes, and even clusters of suicides in areas near electromagnetic testing. The implications stretch even further. HAARP can create artificial disturbances that ripple across Earth's magnetic field, affecting not just local populations, but potentially entire continents. Circadian rhythms shift, thought patterns stray, a subtle nudge here, a heightened agitation there, all without a trace. And then there's targeting. Through individualized frequency signatures, it may be possible to broadcast specific psychological effects to specific people. Tailored transmissions, personalized mental interference. Not science fiction, just science, unspoken. Of course, the official stance is denial. HAARP is a research station, harmless, necessary, transparent. But the technology it represents, transmission of consciousness-altering frequencies, has already shown potential far beyond research. Mobile units now exist. The capability to broadcast thought-shaping signals anywhere in the world is no longer theoretical. When behavioral shifts can be engineered wirelessly, who needs propaganda? This is no longer about what we see or hear. It's about what we feel without knowing why. A sudden fear, an inexplicable calm, the belief that something must be true because it feels true. As we move forward, the question sharpens. How do we defend our minds not just from deception, but from distortion? In the next chapter, we confront perhaps the darkest mirror, when entire events are not merely misrepresented, but manufactured from beginning to end. False realities, real consequences. What if the tragedy was staged and the grief was real? In 1962, a plan landed on the desk of the U.S. Secretary of Defense. Cold, calculated, chilling. It bore the title Operation Northwoods. Its contents? A blueprint for manufacturing events so emotionally devastating, so visually convincing, that the American public would demand war against an enemy that had done nothing. The plan called for fake terrorist attacks on American soil. Bombings, shootings, hijackings, even the planned deaths of U.S. soldiers, all of it meticulously staged. Cuban forces would be framed, evidence planted, witnesses coached. The media, coordinated, the outrage, inevitable. It was not a plot hatched in secret by fringe extremists. It was authored by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military authority in the country. Its objective, to manipulate public emotions so thoroughly that war with Cuba would seem not only justified, but necessary. One proposal involved a commercial airliner. The plane would take off filled with passengers, who would secretly be replaced by government agents. In mid-flight, the plane would disappear from radar. Wreckage would be staged. Families would grieve. And Cuba would be blamed. Another plan called for real U.S. military personnel to be killed in carefully choreographed attacks. Their deaths, though orchestrated, would be genuine. Their funerals, tear-filled. Their stories folded into the history books, not as pawns in a deception, but as heroes lost to a lie. President John F. Kennedy rejected the proposal. Operation Northwoods was shelved. But its logic, the use of fictional events to engineer real political outcomes, remained. What Northwoods revealed was not just a willingness to deceive, but a mastery of it. The plan accounted for every detail: forged documents, fake radio transmissions, fabricated photographs. It anticipated public skepticism and built counter-narratives in advance. It understood something vital. In the modern world, perception is policy. Though Northwoods was never executed, its techniques lived on. False flag operations, as they are now known, became tools of international strategy. Whether used or merely threatened, the machinery exists, ready to craft reality on demand. What's most disturbing isn't that such plans were considered, it's that they required no science fiction, just logistics, just consent. Ask yourself, when the world erupts after a tragedy, how do we know what's real? Is it the footage, the experts, the emotional weight? Or is it something quieter, a trust that what we're being shown is what truly happened? In a world where fiction can be wrapped in authenticity, the truth must work harder than ever to be seen. Next, we step into the present, where digital landscapes offer fertile ground for new forms of manufactured consensus, and where the war for your perception never sleeps. What if your thoughts were not your own, but carefully curated? In 2016, the U.S. State Department launched the Global Engagement Center, GEC. Publicly, it was branded as a counter-disinformation task force, a defense against foreign propaganda. But beneath its official mission lies a more ambitious operation, the shaping of global consensus in the digital age. With partnerships spanning major tech companies, search engines, and social media platforms, GEC operates not through censorship, but through saturation. Algorithms are tuned, search results adjusted, recommendation systems bent ever so slightly. The result? You see what they want you to see. You believe what you've been exposed to the most. Within seconds, GEC can detect a rising narrative online, an idea, a story, a dissenting voice, and flood the space with counter-messaging. Not debate, not dialogue, overwhelm. Artificial intelligence plays a central role. Networks of bots, posing as real users, like, share, and comment with human cadence. They amplify approved messages, silence inconvenient ones, and manufacture the illusion of public agreement. You're not just reading opinions, you're witnessing a scripted chorus. The GEC also employs what's called information inoculation. Populations are preemptively exposed to weakened versions of undesirable narratives, framed in absurdity, so that when real challenges emerge, people are psychologically resistant. Doubt becomes a conditioned reflex. But the reach doesn't end there. Academic journals, research studies, expert panels, GEC influences them too. Funding is granted to voices that support preferred conclusions. Contradictory findings are left unpublished, unpromoted, unread. A false consensus builds, quietly, steadily, invisibly. Even visual content is crafted. AI-generated news articles, deepfake videos, synthetic photographs, fabricated with such precision that they bypass our instinct for scrutiny. What we see, we believe. and belief is the gateway to control. Domestically, GEC monitors American citizens. Posts, likes, shares, analyzed in real time. If you deviate from the accepted narrative, your reach shrinks. Your posts vanish from feeds. Not deleted, just unseen. And yet, none of this feels like tyranny. There are no boots, no bullets, only convenience, only curated truth. The web remains fast, the feed remains full, but dissent becomes a whisper lost in the algorithmic wind. This is the new frontier, a reality where control no longer requires force, just data, just access. So the next time your search results feel oddly unanimous or your timeline repeats the same point in different voices, ask, is this conversation real? In the next chapter, we leave digital shadows behind and step into the ancient and uncanny world of ritual, mysticism, and mind beyond matter, where perception is shaped not by screens or scripts, but by something even older, belief. What if ancient rituals weren't superstition, but technology in disguise? From 1968 to 1972, buried in layers of CIA secrecy, a little-known program unfolded under the name MK Often. It wasn't about spycraft or surveillance. It was about the occult. MK often sought to weaponize the intangible, the mystical, the spiritual, the esoteric, not for faith, for control. The agency enlisted psychologists, anthropologists, parapsychologists, and practicing occultists. Their mission, to explore how ritual, belief, and altered states of consciousness could be harnessed as tools of influence. They recreated tribal initiation ceremonies in laboratory settings, conducted guided mystical experiences using sensory deprivation, chanting, rhythm, and psychoactive substances. Subjects, often unwitting, emerged transformed. Not just temporarily, permanently. Their beliefs, personalities, and behaviors shifted. The goal wasn't religion, it was psychological leverage. Researchers found that carefully designed rituals could implant new realities. Belief systems so vivid, so emotionally resonant, that subjects would act on them with unwavering conviction. Even long after the rituals ended, even if those beliefs contradicted their former identities. More controversial still were the experiments in consciousness projection, out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, astral travel. Reports from the time describe subjects seeing distant locations with surprising detail. Whether it was metaphor, suggestion, or something else, what mattered was the effect. Subjects believed it, and belief, the researchers understood, was more powerful than proof. MK often also explored group rituals, mass-altered states, ceremonies that induced collective shifts in perception. In these environments, suggestion became nearly irresistible. Behavior could be programmed, fears planted, memories blurred. And then came the entities. In some sessions, subjects claimed to encounter non-physical beings, spirits, guides, presences. These encounters felt deeply real. Some subjects returned from these sessions with changed worldviews, new motivations, even skills they didn't previously possess. The agency wasn't concerned with whether these experiences were true, only that they worked. It became clear consciousness could be cracked open, not just with chemicals or trauma, but with belief itself. The researchers weren't interested in spirituality. They were interested in control. They saw in the ancient practices of shamans and mystics a kind of neurological engineering, one that bypassed rational resistance and rewrote the psyche through archetype, symbol, and awe. And perhaps that's the deeper revelation. That reality is shaped as much by what we expect and believe as by what we measure and test. The line between spiritual experience and psychological programming blurred. MK Often was officially shut down, but its findings were never forgotten. its techniques folded into psychological operations that today blend mysticism with media, ritual with simulation. So when you see public spectacles wrapped in symbolism, when collective emotion is stirred by strange iconography, ask, is this theater or technology? Next, we turn to the architects of perception themselves, those tasked not with discovering truth, but with managing it, the engineers of consensus, the designers of public reality. What if reality was not just reported, but engineered? In 1986, the U.S. Department of Defense established a division so discreet its name rarely appears in public documents, the Perception Management Office. Its mandate? To shape not events, but interpretations. To manage not facts, but belief. This wasn't about spinning stories. It was about crafting the frameworks in which stories would be understood. What people thought mattered. But how they thought, how they processed, filtered, and framed information, that was the true battleground. At the heart of this effort was a concept called reality engineering. Not censorship, not propaganda. Instead, a more subtle science, the manipulation of context. Psychologists, media analysts, cognitive scientists, and narrative specialists work together to design experiences, not just messages. These experiences were immersive, emotional, and sticky. Some used virtual reality. Others created real-world simulations. The goal was the same, to implant not just ideas, but worldviews. One method involved staging events, carefully scripted encounters that felt spontaneous. A protest, a confrontation, a miracle, each crafted to generate emotional responses that would anchor specific beliefs. Those beliefs, once rooted, shaped how all future information would be received. Entertainment media played a central role. TV shows, movies, video games, even memes became delivery systems for ideological groundwork. Storylines were seeded with future policy themes years before they appeared in the news. So when the real event happened, the public was already primed. It felt familiar, inevitable. This was called narrative seeding. You don't tell people what to think. You show them a story they want to believe. And then, when reality echoes that story, belief snaps into place. Over time, the office identified unconscious archetypes, deep mental patterns shared across cultures. By understanding these patterns, they could design messages that bypassed rational analysis and spoke directly to the emotional core of the human psyche. And in the background, artificial intelligence watched, monitored, modeled. Social media platforms became petri dishes for mass behavior. Trends were not just tracked, they were guided. Conversations nudged, outrage calibrated, virality predicted. The result was a kind of synthetic consensus, one that didn't require enforcement because it felt organic. But the true innovation of the Perception Management Office wasn't control, it was deniability. Nothing looked engineered. The messages came from journalists. The outrage came from influencers. The beliefs came from you. Or so it seemed. This is not a theory. It's a documented practice. And while the names of programs change, the principle remains. Reality, in the information age, is malleable. So when the world seems to shift overnight, when public opinion pivots, when narratives align too perfectly, pause. Who benefits from the story being told? Next, we gather the threads from all that came before, from memories rewritten, media shaped, emotions tuned, rituals weaponized, and step into the final chapters. A journey not just through manipulation, but toward meaning. What if memory, media, belief, and experience were never separate, but parts of a single system? As we look back across the landscape, MK-Ultra, Mockingbird, COINTELPRO, Operation Chaos, HAARP, Northwoods, and beyond, a pattern emerges. Not just a collection of programs, but a blueprint, a coordinated architecture of influence. Each initiative played a part. One erased memory, Another rewrote it. One controlled media. Another shaped protest. One altered consciousness through ritual. Another through frequency. Some targeted thoughts. Others, the very frameworks in which thoughts form. Together, they did not just manipulate reality. They engineered the experience of being human. The techniques grew more refined, more invisible, from forced amnesia to algorithmic suggestion, from psychedelic reprogramming to AI-guided consensus. The common thread? Belief. Belief is the operating system of the human mind. Change what someone believes, and you change how they interpret everything. Change what they can believe, and you control their imagination. That's the quiet genius behind these programs. They don't need to enforce truth. They shape the boundaries of possibility. Ask yourself, how many opinions you hold were chosen, and how many were given to you, wrapped in emotion, delivered through repetition, reinforced by your peers. Today, reality is not imposed. It's streamed. It's liked. It's subscribed to. It flows through glowing screens, curated feeds, and frictionless interfaces, each interaction a micro-adjustment to your internal map of the world. The power of perception management doesn't lie in making people believe lies. It lies in making them believe the system that defines what is true. And in this new era, dissent no longer needs to be crushed. It just needs to be quieted, marginalized, buried under noise. The unpopular post disappears. The inconvenient idea never trends. You don't need to burn the book. You just make sure no one sees the link. But here's the twist. The human mind is not helpless. Despite the sophistication of influence, people still awaken, still question, still resist. Why? Because something deeper than programming stirs in us when reality no longer feels aligned. A tension, a dissonance, a longing for coherence beyond the script. That's where the journey turns inward. To understand how perception can be manipulated is to glimpse the architecture of our own minds, the fault lines, the levers, but also the compass, the place within us that still seeks what is real. In the next chapter, we follow those who broke free from the narratives, who saw through the veil, and what it cost them. What if waking up cost you everything? Throughout the history of these programs, a few individuals broke through the fog. They saw the threads, traced the patterns, and tried to speak. Some were insiders, some were targets, all paid a price. Dr. Frank Olson was a biological warfare scientist. After a secret MK-Ultra experiment left him disoriented and disturbed, he expressed doubts about the work he was part of. Days later, he fell, was pushed, from a 13th-story hotel window. Officially, it was suicide. Decades later, an exhumation revealed blunt force trauma inconsistent with a fall. Gary Webb, a journalist, uncovered how U.S. intelligence agencies were tied to drug trafficking in inner-city communities. His Dark Alliance series broke open a hidden network. He was discredited, hounded, and ultimately found dead from 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Officially, suicide. Others simply vanished. Researchers, whistleblowers, insiders with too much access and not enough protection. Their names appear in documents, then disappear. But not all who saw through the illusion were silenced. Some spoke quietly, patiently. They wrote books, taught classes, started conversations. They shifted from confrontation to illumination. What united them was a common moment, the realization that something they had trusted, an institution, a memory, a belief, was built on sand. For some, it began with a single inconsistency, a news story that didn't align with what they knew, a conversation that felt off, a déjà vu that unraveled into revelation. That small thread led deeper, into declassified files, archived footage, long-forgotten testimonies. And suddenly, the map of reality looked different. But awakening is not clarity. it is exile. From comfort, from consensus, from the ease of certainty. To question official narratives, even gently, is to be labeled suspicious, unpatriotic, unstable. Society has built-in antibodies against those who step outside its boundaries, not because it's evil, but because coherence is safety. Dissent is noise, and so many return to the fold, not because they were wrong, but because the cost of knowing was too great. But others choose a different path, not rage, not retreat, but awareness with humility. They become observers, listeners, mappers of the invisible. They don't claim to know all the answers. They ask better questions. And perhaps that is the most radical act of all, not to believe nothing, but to believe consciously, to recognize that truth is not given. It is earned, assembled, and reassembled, one perception at a time. In the next chapter, we draw the lens back. We look not just at those who saw through reality, but at what their journey tells us about ourselves and the age we now live in. What if the age of deception was also the age of awakening? Step back for a moment. Look not at the programs themselves, but at the world they've shaped, the world we now call normal. A world where surveillance is ambient, where our devices listen more than our friends, where reality arrives in curated tiles on glowing screens, where truth is algorithmic, ephemeral, and always just out of reach. We live in a time when every fact can be challenged, every image doubted, every memory revised. The result is not just confusion, it's exhaustion. And in that exhaustion, we seek simplicity, certainty, a story that makes the chaos feel ordered again. That's the final genius of perception management. It doesn't require you to believe. It only requires you to stop asking. But something else is happening too. More people are noticing the patterns, not falling for the extremes or conspiracies, but asking deeper questions about what it means to know something, to trust, to perceive. Books are being reopened, histories re-examined, memories compared. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, a different kind of clarity begins to emerge, not about who's lying, but about how easily we believe. Because this is not just a story about manipulation. It's a story about being human. We are storytelling creatures. We hunger for meaning. We seek the familiar. We rely on patterns, on emotion, on narrative. And in that beautiful fragility, we are vulnerable, not just to others, but to ourselves. That vulnerability has been studied, modeled, and weaponized. But it can also be honored. When we understand how easily we are shaped, we also understand how to unshape, to rebuild. It begins with presence, with pausing before reacting, with holding multiple truths gently without rushing to closure, with learning how our own minds work and choosing not to be ruled by fear, repetition, or convenience. Not all realities are false, but all realities are filtered. The question is, who's holding the lens? And maybe, just maybe, this age of digital illusion is inviting us to remember something ancient. That wisdom comes not from knowing, but from listening, from noticing, from asking, not what is true, but what is being asked of us when something is presented as truth. In our final chapter, we return full circle to memory, to truth, to the question that began this journey. What remains when everything can be manipulated? What remains when everything can be manipulated? A face, a name, a moment, a memory. We began this journey with a woman who no longer recognized her own life, her memories rewritten, her identity reassigned, a manufactured reality. And yet, somewhere inside her, a flicker of doubt, a question, a whisper. This isn't who I am. That whisper may be the most human thing of all. In a world where governments can alter perception, where media can script consensus, where technology can mimic truth and emotion alike, What remains is the fragile, resilient spark of individual awareness. The quiet voice that asks, "Does this feel right?" The hesitation before belief. The pause before reaction. We live now in a time where illusion is not the exception. It is the environment. Yet even here, reality is not lost. It is simply hidden beneath layers of suggestion, repetition, and noise. And sometimes, finding it means stepping away from the signal, from the story, from the screen. The truth is not always convenient. It is rarely complete, but it is alive. It pulses in questions asked sincerely, in silence chosen wisely, in stories examined, not swallowed whole. We must learn to live not in certainty, but in curiosity, because reality at its core is a shared act, a collective agreement, and that agreement becomes dangerous only when we forget that we chose it. So what can we do? We can notice. We can slow down. We can ask who benefits from the version of the world we are being handed. We can become stewards of our own minds, tending them not with suspicion, but with care. This isn't a call to reject everything. It's an invitation to re-enter the world, not blindly, but with eyes open, to see how perception has been shaped and to gently reshape it ourselves. Because if everything can be manipulated, then so can kindness, so can wonder, so can connection. The tools of influence do not belong solely to those in power. They belong to all of us. And perhaps in the end, the greatest resistance is not outrage, but clarity. Not noise, but understanding. Not control, but compassion. We have traveled through memory, belief, emotion, and story. We've seen how they can be stolen, but we've also seen how they can be reclaimed. So here, at the edge of the artificial, we plant something real, a question, a choice, and the beginning of a different kind of truth, one you build, not one you're given.